Thank you very much, Deputy. And thanks for inviting me to be able to do the talk. I don't really do little presentations here in this class, but thanks so much. Deputy said to me to try and keep it to 20 minutes. I'll do my best. Because Ricardo and myself, and Vilasadippa and Lisette was on the course as well. We've just finished this course in Spanish, in fact, last week. Mm-hmm. So I'm trying to do a very quick resume of what we did there. And last week the Ampati talked about, the course, as Diam said, is about exploring what freedom is. And I'm not going to say really much about what he covered before, but he sort of talked about, well, what is freedom? And often we tend to, so is freedom is one of those words, it's a bit like love. It can mean something very profound or something a bit on the surface of life. But often freedom, we think of it as freedom of choice to do what we want, when we want to do it, and also freedom from external oppression. And in a way there is freedom there, but it's a limited freedom. And what the Buddha was getting at is something much more profound, much more deep. It's a sort of internal experience of freedom, no matter what the external conditions are. And last week, Diampi talked about the Dakini, and earlier on, Aryapala mentioned in Buddhism that there's a great sort of place for ritual, for image, for myth. There's a great place for intellectual clarity as well, but you need both things. And the Dakini is a sort of poetic evocation of what I'm about to talk about. The Dakini is, you've got Dakinis and Dakas, so a female or a male figure, typically young, typically beautiful, typically painted as expressing this sort of freedom, okay? So I'm going to be kind of giving something of an intellectual or a rational unpacking of that to a degree, okay? So it's important that you kind of get that sense. There's different ways into freedom. One is through image, poetry, metaphor, another is through concepts. I'm going to be talking about concepts. So this morning, the main thing I'm going to try and touch in 20 minutes is a central teaching in Buddhism called conditioned co-production. And basically, what the Buddha is saying that we've got it badly wrong. He's saying that our take on life, we've got it badly wrong, and because of that, we suffer, okay? He's saying that there isn't a fixed essence in life. You know, we tend to see ourselves as quite fixed and permanent and lasting. We tend to see the world outside us as that. But he's saying that's a very wrong view. And basically, the world is compounded of different conditions, lots and lots of different conditions. So this building here, I know because Rijamati and me were here when that happened. And we dug out floors, we put in all sorts of stuff, we put these boards up here. Before this was just a shell, okay? So this is arisen in terms of conditions. How you're feeling this morning will be because of how you've acted in the past as well, okay? If you stayed up half the night, you're going to be a bit groggy. You probably slept in meditation. If you've had a good day yesterday, had a good night's sleep, you've probably had a good meditation, okay? Just very briefly, even on a physical level, we're very, very deeply conditioned. So if we don't get the right amount of warmth, if we don't eat enough food, especially if we don't get water, we're not going to last very long. So physically, we're very conditioned as well. So we're much, much more conditioned than we realise, both physically and in terms of our mental states. So the main sort of thing is, in relation to this, is that the Buddha said that sort of mind is the basis of all experience. Mind is the basis of all experience. So the situation that we find ourselves in now, how we feel, how we are, is broadly because of how we've acted in the past, is broadly because of the the sort of views and attitudes that we hold. Okay, so that's what he's saying, and because of that, we relate to life in a particular sort of way. That's a very key Buddhist teaching, and that's why Aryapala led us into the meditation this morning, to help ground us, to help give us a sense of where we're going in the meditation, to help open our minds up. And then, to the extent that you have a good meditation, you develop positivity, greater awareness. Your experience of yourself and the world will be different. And so the Buddha says that basically, sort of mind as experience, broadly speaking, you can group this sort of mind into two camps. So this is me giving you a very broad sense of things. It's sort of more subtle than this, but so sort of you can have what's called a creative mind, okay, or you can have a reactive sort of mind. And the creative mind is an ethically pure, more ethically pure mind. So it's some wholesome, good human mental states. We're talking about wholesome human mental and emotional states, okay? And it's underpinned by qualities such as honesty, such as generosity, truthfulness, kindness, those sorts of qualities that become rooted into your mind. The reactive states, which I know very well for myself, they're often driven by us wanting things our own way. And I know this very, very much in my own experience too. They're driven by not being honest, not being straightforward. They're also sadly driven, and we don't really need to go into this because we can see this going on in the world, they're driven by cruelty and ill will. And the thing about the reactive mind is that it's a bit addictive, actually. It's compulsive, and to the extent that we're in this sort of reactive mind, it's not a very aware mind. It's just sort of reacting. It's like as we say in English, a knee-jerk reaction, okay, to external stimuli. And to the extent that we're in that, if we don't like something, there's a reaction. And what we're trying to do is sort of bring more awareness to our experience to see what's going on. Because if we're caught in this sort of reactive mind, it's a little bit, I metaphorically, for me, it feels a bit like a gravitational pull. Have you ever been, I can't surf, I'd love to surf, I've never been able to do it, but I travelled in Australia, and I'm afraid to say all I could manage was I think they call them boogie boards, is that correct? Yeah. You sort of lie on this board, and then you try and sort of catch a wave, and you feel silly because everybody who's cool is standing up. However, if you're doing that sort of thing, you get a strong sense of the force of the water, a real strong sense of the force of the water, the waves, and it's very shocking at first. Australian waves are quite powerful. Apparently, it's the number one dangerous thing in Australia. It's not the snakes and spiders, it's the waves. Anyway, the reactive mind to me is a bit like that. It's that sort of force that can carry us along, and to the extent that we act out of it, we suffer. Actually, we don't taste this sense of freedom. And what Buddhism is saying basically is that if you want to develop this taste of freedom, you sort of try and act out of the creative mind. So that means meditating, cultivating awareness, a bit like Aryapala was doing. He's getting us to connect with our experience going into the meditation, so we become honest. We become honest about what's going on. And the more we can establish ourselves in this creative mind, then the more we notice that happiness sort of organically begins to arrive. We'll still have challenges and problems in life, but we'll face them in a different way, with a different attitude. And to the extent that we can sort of develop this sort of creative mind, it's just something mysterious starts opening up in our experience. And one of the things is to say is that if we're trapped in this sort of reactive mode a bit, and I know this very well from myself, life feels problematic, but it feels complicated and it feels somewhat oppressive. But if we're in more the creative mode, even though there's challenges, we're somehow less troublesome. We're somehow less troublesome, actually. And so where does this begin? And I've only got 10 minutes left, so I'll have to speed along. So there's a teaching in Buddhism called the spiral path. The spiral path, okay? And this is what leads to freedom. This is what leads to freedom. So basically it's sort of this creative mind sort of in action. So we cultivate positive mental states and we sort of imbibe them, and then they start growing. They start growing organically. That's the nature of those states. They sort of grow and blossom organically. We just need to put the conditions in. And to the extent that we begin to do this, we begin to sort of break free of this sort of more what I think of as a reactive force of gravity, this sort of wave that sort of carries us along. So where does this start? How do we begin to connect with what is the spiral path? So we have our experience of life, we have our mind. So what's the first step? What's the first step?
So if I remember correctly, the wheel of life, the spiral path begins in the gap, doesn't it? Between becoming aware of something and reacting to something. So there's a gap where meditation helps to find this gap, I think, where we should reflect when we become aware of something, where there's an impulse before we react to it.
That's sort of it, yeah. So basically, the Buddha would say that what we tend to do is we see, and this is a challenging thing, we think that the solution to life, and we think what will give us happiness is satisfying all our desires, okay? And if they're not satisfied somehow, then we're going to be happy. So that's instinctively how we operate, and it's quite challenging because that's quite unconscious in us as well, actually. That's quite unconscious in us as well. And to the extent that we're caught in that, there's a push and pull. We're trying to control, we're trying to sort of manage life, we're trying to get things right the way we want. I do this myself, I know what it's like. But actually, what happens is your experience narrows down. There's a narrowing down that happens, a narrowing down. What Grish is sort of hinting at is that we try and bring awareness to our experience, yeah? We try and bring awareness to the sort of, I think myself in terms of the heights and depths of our experience, okay? And I think that's a very courageous thing to do, but it's necessary if we want to change. But the trouble is, at least my interpretation, we can talk about this in the groups, but society doesn't like that. If you sort of, it's hard to say, well actually I'm not alright, things are difficult, somehow then we're a failure. But no. That's the beginning of this touching this spiral path. Buddhism tradition talks about it as dukkha, or unsatisfactoriness. So that this sense that something in life isn't quite working right for us, and that's to be rejoiced in. That is to be rejoiced in, actually. And this will sort of bring us out of this oscillation between pushing and pulling, trying to control, being trapped in cycles and habits, and bring us out into something much more amazing and creative. Most of us are experiencing something of this all the time, this sort of push and pull, this element of unsatisfactoriness, yeah? And it's okay to be okay with that. That's the main thing I want to say. It's fine not to be okay, as long as you're aware about what's happening, more or less. And you can kind of ground yourself and you can begin to move forward. that's why why we meditate. So in Buddhism, we meditate to develop more awareness, and develop positivity, and work with ourselves, and try and change habits and patterns that are cyclic and reactive and that lead to suffering. So the next thing I want to talk about, and then I'll probably leave it there, I won't have time to ramble on, is I want to talk about the second stage of the spiral path. And I think there's 12 stages. We're not going to go into them, there's too much in a short period of time. But most of us are working in the first two stages, really. That's the reality of it. The second stage is called Shraddha. Can someone who's been along just in 5 words say what Shraddha is? Just 5 words only. If you can tell me what it is in 5 words, that will help because I'm running out of time.
Don't worry. It's a sort of a discipline?
That's part of it, but it's much broader than that.
Yeah. So it's a faith.
Yeah, it's a sort of confidence, a faith. That's exactly it. I mean, the first thing I want to say is, so as we get at sort of, maybe just to say, as humans, one of the remarkable, Buddhism is an incredibly optimistic view of human beings, really. It's tremendously optimistic. Sometimes myself, I think, Jesus, it's just like too optimistic. I shouldn't say that, should I? I do believe thoroughly in the Buddhist vision. I've based my life on it, but it's such a positive vision for us. It's hard to take in, especially when you look at what's sort of happening in the world. So Shraddha has this human capacity to appreciate value, to appreciate meaning. So things like beauty, art, friendship, the noble deeds of other people in particular, people that you look up to, your own qualities as well. That's very important. So it's a normal human capacity that we have. And the second great phase or great step in this path to freedom is sort of actually taking that seriously and cultivating. Shraddha isn't the property of Buddhists alone, it's a human faculty. But in Buddhism it's very, very important. This ability to appreciate value is seen as very, very important on the Buddhist path, because Buddhism is a path that you can only choose consciously for yourself. That's very important. So you can't practice out of blind faith, nor can you practice because of the word of somebody else. You've got to practice the teaching, test it out for yourself, see does it work in your experience, and have an honest dialogue about that with other people. But the thing is, I'm talking about a Buddhist context now. The more, in my experience, that I tried Buddhism out and tested it, I've been practicing since I was 20. I've had my ups and downs for sure, but over the years I found that like the confidence that I've had in the Buddhist path has been basically the solid ground of my life, and it's enabled me to change in ways that I never would have dreamed of when I was 20. So in a way, this sense of confidence on the path is really, really important. And just to say, there's lots and lots of teachings, Buddhist Dharma teachings. I would say you only need confidence in a small number of teachings. If you've got confidence in meditation, ethical practice, and friendship, and some sort of feeling for trying to develop clarity, that's sort of enough, really, I think. It'll take you a long way. And a bit like Aryapala said earlier, when he gave his introduction, our emotions have to be involved if you want to change. So no matter what path you end up choosing, it can't just be heady, it can't be intellectual. That's in Buddhism. The Zen tradition talked about head Buddhism. If you just if it's on an intellectual level, it goes nowhere. The kind of emotions, the deeper structure of our being has to be involved. And I was thinking yesterday about this sense of Shraddha, and in a way, it's sort of like loving the path. For me, it's about loving the Buddhist path. You know, so I can't really think of any other direct way to talk about it, but it's this sense of love and appreciation and reverence in the path. Yeah. Now you don't worry if you if you're new here. I'm not saying you need to develop that, but what I would say is that you could think of this sort of element of shraddha, of confidence and trust. If you're interested in Buddhism, if you're interested in meditation, you could think of it in terms of just trying to develop more of a sort of positive response of potential and possibility in relation to your experience, especially if there's difficulties going on. You know, you don't have to respond in a typical way. You can try to figure out what you need to do in order to change something in yourself so that you're responding a bit differently. Okay. Now they're the first two stages of this path. There's 12 stages in total. I'm not going to talk about the other stages, but it's a progressive positive unfolding of joy, bliss, rapture, until we get to the 8th stage, which is called knowledge and vision of things as they are. And in this stage, this sense of freedom, this creative mind, it becomes rooted in us. We become it becomes us. Our consciousness becomes sort of it in a way, and there's no falling back into the reactive mind all the time. And from there, the tradition says, we can gain the enlightenment, what the Buddha, this sense of freedom, what the Buddha achieved. So I'll leave it there, except to say one final thing. I'll give Oscar Wilde the last word. Some of us, we're all in the gutter, but some of us are looking at the stars. So that is the situation. And, you know, for me, the Buddha is the stars. Thank you.
Thank you.